Hey y'all, Organizing Higher, welcome or welcome back. I share organization and productivity tips, tools, and resources. If you're into that, be sure to subscribe. Also, through the video, if you see anything or hear anything that's particularly resonates with you, be sure to hit that thumbs up button to give me feedback. Okay, let's get started. Getting stuff out of your head, clarifying next actions, organizing tasks. This is not new. This is not rocket science. But ultimately, GTD is just a blueprint for you to create your own personal productivity system. And your system really should be as unique as your fingerprint or your eye scan. That's because nobody else in the world thinks like you, creates like you, writes like you. And so what works well for someone else might not work well for you, and vice versa. So instead of copying word for word, item for item what someone else is doing, get inspiration and ideas for things that you could then apply to your GTD practice. That's really what's helped me to create the system that I have right now. And it also helps when I have a stumbling block or I'm not quite sure what to do about something, to go to all of the resources that exist online, on YouTube, on Reddit, on the GTD forum, to get even more inspiration for things that I can do to switch up my system. That's why I definitely always encourage people on my videos to leave comments about how they're practicing GTD, because I'm only offering one perspective and I love to hear from other people so we can share with each other. So definitely comment below what mistakes you've made or mistakes that you've seen others make or questions that you have. When I first started practicing GTD, I had my projects list, but what I would do is at the beginning of each workday, I'd basically sit down and think about a project that was on my mind or maybe something that was happening that week. And then I would just think, okay, what are all the things that I need to do connected to this project? And then I would just start doing all those things until I felt a little bit better or less stressed about that project. So sometimes that would mean I would spend like a whole day making progress on a project, but sometimes that was to the detriment of other projects that I was neglecting or my emails. It also meant I was constantly switching from brainstorming to word processing to sending emails to reading emails, and context switching is so terrible for productivity. So these days, instead of looking at my projects list to decide what to do next, I look at my next actions list. And I don't know why it took me so long to come to this realization. I had next actions, I was using labels and tags, but I would only ever look at the projects list. I would never look at the next actions list. And doing this has been such a huge game changer for me. When I'm working within contexts and I'm doing all of my emails, I know that I'm making progress on maybe a project that is bothering me, but on the way there, I'm making progress on some other projects that I'm not necessarily thinking of, but that are important too, because I've just cleared my entire email list. And if you've not experienced how amazing it feels to clear a next actions list, it's just such a huge sense of relief to know that if I've cleared my internet list or my email list or my calls list, I've made progress on not one project in the 30-minute span that I spend doing that. I've made progress on like 20 projects or 10 projects that I'm working on. And that's such a huge relief, especially when I have these like one-off emails that I need to send that aren't connected to a project. I just get them out of the way and then they're off my mind. The other thing I started doing is if I do have that moment where I have a project that's like really just on my mind, and I want to like go and just, I'm drawn to like working out of that project bucket, I just stop. And a lot of times that means I just need to spend like 20 minutes brainstorming or clarifying like the steps involved with that project. And so many times it's not actually doing the steps involved with that project that gives me a sense of relief. It's just making a plan for doing those steps. That's what gives me that sense of relief. If you want to know more about how I'm using my next actions list for GTD, I have a video that I'll link below where I talk about how I'm using Todoist with filters to set up my next actions lists automatically. Last year, I changed jobs and my GTD setup in my old job looked very different from what it looks like right now. And that's because the work that I'm doing and the workload that I have is completely different. So of course, when I tried to just transport my old GTD system into my new working environment, it didn't work. It stopped working. Certain pieces weren't as effective as they were in my old job. So I was literally having nightmares about like forgetting a meeting or not being prepared for a meeting, which was a sign to me that I needed to kind of get back in control of my system. So I went back to the fundamentals. I reread GTD, I did more research on it and found that there were some areas that I was neglecting or that I had forgotten about because I hadn't needed to use them in my old job. Things like project support, which I'll talk about later in this video, things that I'm using now that I need to do a lot more with in my job now that I didn't have to do. So these days, I've completely changed the way that I'm using my calendar, the way that I'm using a tickler file, for example, the way I'm organizing emails, especially as I've been working from home this past year. There's a lot more emails and my need to organize them has completely shifted. As the number of inputs that you have and the work that you're doing becomes complex and bigger, your system's gonna have to evolve in order to keep up with that. So don't be too rigid in your system, but also don't constantly switch up things just for the sake of change or novelty, because that actually might just be procrastination. I would put on a lot of annual or seasonal events, so like conferences and awards. And what I used to do is I would have a checklist of all of those things, the tasks that I needed to do in order for those events to be successful. So I would create a template in Todoist. I would add all of the tasks in Todoist. I would export it as a template, and then each year or each semester, I would just be able to import tasks from that template and not have to reinvent the wheel every time I was planning for that particular task or event. But then, because I was working out of projects and not next actions, I would see this huge list of tasks for like an award ceremony. I'd see 70 tasks that needed to be done. Now I knew psychologically, I could only do the next action, but even seeing those other 69 tasks was really stressful for me. These days, I know that the tasks that you put in Todoist really should just be the next actions. Or if you're going to put those other tasks in there, it should be very clear which tasks are the next actions and which tasks are not. For me, using something like a section or a label isn't enough. I just literally don't want to see it in Todoist at all. And that's why I moved that stuff to Project Support. I've started using Project Support a whole lot more. Some of the Project Support I have in OneNote. Some of it I've actually been transitioning over to Obsidian. I really like that platform for linking my notes especially. And so my checklists live in that Project Support area. I keep my notes there. And then as I'm doing my weekly review, every single week, I'll see those items on that checklist. And as I'm making progress on that project, if I need to know, okay, what's the next action, I can just go look at my project or Project Support area, pull in that next action, and then bam, I know exactly the thing that I need to do next. When I've started making folders for Project Support for emails, that's definitely helped in my new job as well, because it stops me from having to search through my old emails constantly for files or emails associated with a case or an active project that I'm working on. Adding due dates to everything or even a lot of things can very quickly become overwhelming. So I did this very early on. I would have essentially two kinds of due dates. I would have real due dates, like I have to do this by a certain day, and I would have nice to do dates, like I'll probably start this on Friday, or I'll probably start this on Tuesday. David Allen says there's only two kinds of talent. David Allen says there's only two types. Damn it. David Allen says there's only two types of calendar actions. Actions that you have to do at a certain day or time, and actions that you want to be reminded of on a certain day or time. And nothing else should be on your calendar or really have a date associated with them. So taking that and remembering that idea, I've applied it to Todoist. And that's the only things that get due dates, things that have to be done by a certain date. I have that due date in Todoist. I used to have tasks in Todoist and I'd be like, oh, it would be nice to do this on Friday. And then Friday would come and I would have too many fires pop up and I wouldn't be able to get to that task. And then I'd be like, oh, okay, not a big deal. That wasn't actually due on Friday. Let me just move it to Tuesday. And that worked for a while, except at some point I stopped remembering what the real due date was and if it was a real due date or a pretend due date. And that is not a good place to be. So I had to stop lying to myself and be consistent that the only tasks in Todoist, if it had a due date, it had to be due that particular day. If I didn't get it done that day, something would explode. So like if I don't complete this report by Tuesday, then it won't be ready for the board meeting on Tuesday. or if I don't process these approvals by Saturday, then the event can't happen on that following Monday. Those are real things that impact other things down the road. Whereas me responding to someone's request to review a memo, if I don't get to that on Friday, it probably isn't going to blow anything up, particularly if they've given me a little bit of buffer time. They could spare another day or two. Or if I don't give them feedback, like, the show will go on. So I'll usually put tasks either in Todoist with a due date, or I'll put a tickler file item on my calendar. And so if I have to just be reminded of something like, oh yeah, I said I would get back to Stacy about the report on Friday. So I put a reminder in my calendar on Friday, get back to Stacy on her report. And then a lot of times I'll put like a note to myself in the Outlook entry and just say, you know, I told her I would get to this on Friday. So that way I'm reminding myself, this is not a due date. This is a commitment that I've made that can be negotiated. And it's nice to be able to leave those notes for myself so I don't have to rethink, wait, is this a real due date or is this a tickler file item? Also, during my weekly review, I'm reviewing my calendar. So I'm gonna get notified and reminded about these things basically twice. Once during my weekly review, and then the second time I'm gonna get reminded is when I get to that day. So if it's, you know, Monday and I sit down at my desk, one of the things that I do every day is just look at my calendar for that day. So I'm going to be reminded, oh yeah, I have that thing that's due today and I want to make sure that I have time to get to that. That's why it's super important to do the weekly reviews so you don't forget these things. What are some changes that you've made as you've been practicing GTD? Share those below so that others who are getting started or who are looking to make some changes can get ideas and inspiration. Thanks so much for watching and have a great week.